Chapter 2 The Lazarus Job. The Lazarus storage facility loomed in the distance, its sleek black exterior glowing faintly under the city's hazy lights. The building looked more like a fortress than a laboratory. Perched ominously on the seawall, it stood in stark contrast to the crumbling abandoned buildings surrounding it, hollow shells of a city long past its prime. The rhythmic crash of waves against the wall drowned out most other sounds, adding an eerie cadence to the scene. The air was thick with tension and Will crouched in the shadows, his nerves humming in tune with the restless ocean below. "This is it, y'all," Happ whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city. He was crouched next to Will, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Lazarus tech is worth more than anything else in this city. Get in, grab the red-marked crates, and get out." Will's gut churned. The hum of unseen machines vibrated through the air, a faint, ominous reminder that they were trespassing on dangerous ground. The facility almost seemed alive, its faint glow casting shifting shadows across the perimeter. "You sure this is a good idea?" Will asked, his fingers fumbling with the lock on the side entrance. "Relax, man. You're thinking too much," Happ said, crouching beside him with his usual cocky grin. "That's the problem. You don't think enough," Will shot back, his voice low but sharp. Happ chuckled, leaning casually against the wall. "Look, you keep worrying about what could go wrong, and I'm here thinking about what's about to go right. You ever try that, Will? Thinking positive?" Will rolled his eyes, his fingers working the lock with methodical precision. "I'm positive this is the dumbest thing we've ever done." "Dumber than that time we boosted the councilman's car? Or when we sold weed to that undercover?" Happ quipped, a smirk spreading across his face. "At least we didn't have armed guards waiting to blow our heads off," Will hissed, glancing over his shoulder. Details," Happ said, waving him off like it was nothing. "Come on, man. You used to be fun. What happened to that guy who wasn't scared of anything?" "He grew up," Will muttered. With a final click, the lock gave way, and Will shot Happ a withering look. "If we get caught, this is on you." Yeah, Happ said, clapping Will on the shoulder as they slipped inside. "You can blame me all you want after we're rich." The interior of the Lazarus facility was as cold and sterile as a morgue. Dull pulsing lights lined the walls, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift and dance with every step they took. The air was heavy, tinged with a metallic scent that made Will's stomach churn. Rows of towering crates stretched into the distance, each one stamped with the sleek Lazarus insignia. The hum of machinery was loud here, pulsing like a living thing. It made the hairs on the back of Will's neck stand on end. "Red crates," Happ whispered, his voice barely audible. "Spread out and look for them." Will moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the rows of cargo. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to get out while he still could. The shadows seemed to close in around him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "This shit don't feel right," he muttered under his breath, gripping his crowbar tightly. Happ's voice crackled over the comm. "Quit bitching and do your job." Will clenched his jaw, biting back the string of curses that threatened to spill out. He rounded a corner and spotted one of the red-marked crates. Relief washed over him as he knelt beside it, prying the lid loose with practiced efficiency. Inside were rows of sleek metallic cylinders, each one glowing faintly with an unearthly blue light. The glow pulsed gently, almost hypnotically, casting an eerie luminescence that bathed Will's hands in an otherworldly hue. "What the hell is this?" he murmured, his brow furrowing. Before he could process what he was looking at, a loud alarm blared, shattering the tense silence. The sudden burst of noise was deafening, red lights flooding the facility and bathing everything in a strobe-like chaos. "Shit!" Happ shouted over the comm. "Grab what you can and move." Will grabbed several of the glowing cylinders and shoved them into his bag and slammed the crate shut, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. The sound of pounding footsteps echoed through the facility as guards swarmed the area. Their shouts were muffled by the blaring alarm, but their presence was unmistakable. "Scatter!" Happ yelled. "Meet at the spot." Will darted down a side corridor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The heavy boots of Lazarus security were close behind, their flashlights slicing through the darkness like knives. The facility felt like a labyrinth, every turn leading to another dead end. Finally, he burst through a side door into the cold night air, but his relief was short-lived. A harsh spotlight snapped on, blinding him and pinning him in place like a deer caught in headlights. "Freeze!" one of the guards barked, leveling a weapon at Will's chest. Will's heart raced as he raised his hands slowly, the stolen cylinders pressing against his back through the thin fabric of his bag. He scanned his surroundings, desperately searching for an escape, but he was surrounded. Then he heard it, a faint hiss, almost imperceptible beneath the chaos. "What the—" was all he managed before a sharp pain stabbed into his neck. His vision blurred, the world tilting sideways as his legs gave out beneath him. Through the haze, he saw one of the guards holstering a strange syringe, the Lazarus insignia gleaming ominously on their uniform. "We'll take it from here," a calm voice said, though Will couldn't make out the speaker. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was the glint of metal and the faint pulsating glow of the cylinders in his bag. Will woke up on a cold metal cot, his body aching as if he'd been hit by a freight train. The faint sound of shouting echoed somewhere in the distance, muffled and distorted like a bad dream. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh glow making his head throb. "Where?" he muttered, his voice hoarse and barely audible. The cot rattled as he shifted, the steel scraping unpleasantly across the concrete floor. The sterile gray walls of the holding cell came into focus, their oppressive blankness adding to his growing sense of dread. Heavy metal cuffs weighed down his wrists, the cold bite of the restraint sending a jolt of panic through him. Flashes of memory surfaced, blaring alarms, pounding footsteps, the sharp sting of the syringe, but they were disjointed, like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Will rubbed his temple, his frustration mounting with each passing second. The more he tried to recall, the more the memories slipped away, like sand through his fingers. All he knew for certain was that he'd been caught, and yet deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse had happened. It wasn't just the heist that had gone wrong, something had been done to him. He ran his fingers over the spot on his neck where the syringe had pierced his skin, expecting raw tenderness, but instead he felt hardly anything. The ache was barely there, just a dull echo of pain, as if the wound had already healed. "How long have I been out?" he thought to himself as his stomach twisted with unease. "What the hell did they do to me?" he muttered, his voice laced with equal parts fear and anger. The sound of a distant door slamming pulled him from his thoughts. Footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder with each passing moment. Will's pulse quickened as the footsteps abruptly halted outside his cell, the tension thickening in the air. His mind raced, heart pounding, as a heavy-set jail guard leaned in, peering through the plexiglass window of the steel door. "Looks like Pod 12 finally woke up," the guard scoffed, his voice grating. "Let's get him processed." Will let his head fall back against the cold, unforgiving cot, the weight of the situation settling in. "Shit," he muttered under his breath, the words barely escaping as he slowly pushed himself upright, his limbs stiff and reluctant. The guards entered his cell, their boots thudding heavily on the concrete floor.